Most of us can imagine what it is like to have such an experience, to be so affected by some particular event or something that happens in our lives that it continues to have an impact upon our lives, sometimes even for the rest of our lives. A mountaintop experience. It doesn't necessarily take place, of course, on the top of a mountain, but nevertheless, it has that kind of gravity, that kind of importance that it touches our lives and it penetrates into the very core of our being. Mountaintop experiences. That's very much what this festival is all about that we celebrate today, the Transfiguration of our Lord. It's a peculiar festival in some sense because it doesn't have any direct linkage to this particular time of the year. And of course, not to any particular date. Unlike Easter or Christmas or other holidays and festivals that we celebrate as God's people, this festival could be celebrated at virtually any time during the year. But we celebrate it at this time for a very specific reason, because it marks for us the crossing over point for Jesus in his ministry, from being the one who went about Galilee teaching and preaching and healing, and then set his face toward Jerusalem, knowing that when he got there, he would be handed over to his enemies, he would be humiliated, he would suffer, and ultimately he would die. But Jesus' event of the Transfiguration was certainly a mountaintop experience in which he had a chance to reflect on what was going on prior to that day, but more importantly, to think about the days ahead and what it would take for him to come down from the mountain and to set his face toward Jerusalem. It was not an easy time for Jesus, I'm sure. Despite the fact that there were the images there of Moses and Elijah, the cloud, the voice from heaven, affirming him, saying, "This is my son, the beloved, with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him." He might have been drawn back in his memory to that day at the River Jordan when he came up out of the water and the Spirit descended upon him in the form of a dove, and he began to realize that this mission that God had given him was for real and was about to begin. But now he heard the voice again. The same voice. And this time he knew that another phase of that mission was about to begin. And that part of his mission that he had been carrying out was now going to be behind him. It was truly a very important time for Jesus in his ministry. Certainly, we would call it a mountaintop experience, even if he were not literally on top of a mountain, as the story goes. However, when we gather on this day, we celebrate not just one mountaintop experience, but two. Because as you recall, in the lesson that Bruce read a few moments ago from Exodus chapter 24, there was someone else who centuries earlier had a similar kind of experience of going up on a mountain, all alone in this case, and experiencing the presence and the power of God. "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there," the voice of God said to him. What a compelling command. What do you do when God says to you, "Do this," in no uncertain terms? Not talking to anyone else. He was talking directly to Moses. And so Moses, in obedience to God's command, went up on the mountain. He left behind the elders of the people. He brought with him Joshua part of the way and then even left Joshua behind. And finally, he entered into that space where no human being had ever stepped before. He entered into the presence, the awesome presence and majesty of God. Not knowing, of course, what the future would have in store for him. Well, the setting, of course, is very important for us and probably good for us to back up a little bit and just think about what this event is all about. Moses has been leading the people of Israel, and here he has come to Mount Sinai with them. But before that, a lot of things have happened. You recall how sometime earlier, Moses had been out there shepherding the sheep, and he had had that experience with God, speaking to him from a bush that looked like it was burning up, but not consumed. And then after that, he had left that place, and he had left Midian, he had traveled back to Egypt. And that's where he went face to face, nose to nose with the Pharaoh. And there in the presence of the Pharaoh, he said, "Let my people go." Talk about chutzpah. He must have been shaking in his sandals. Nevertheless, he had the word from God, he had the promise from God, and more importantly, he had a command from God to say this. And so he did that very thing. And when Pharaoh said no, then Moses said, "You're going to regret it." And sure enough, Pharaoh and the people of Egypt regretted what took place as a result of the Pharaoh's stubborn neck, stiff-necked Pharaoh. You recall the story of the 10 plagues, and I won't go through them in any detail, but you recall that one after another, these plagues kept coming upon the people of Egypt until finally the most dreaded of all plagues, the plague of the death of the firstborn of Egypt, the Passover. And finally Pharaoh gave up and said, "Get out of here." And the people were ready. They had their final meal. They had baked their bread. They had all their things packed. And on the command of Moses, they headed out from there, and they traveled towards the land that God had promised to them. Getting to the shore of the sea, there they looked out and saw the expanse of water out there in front of them. And behind them they saw the clouds of dust rising up from the chariots of the Pharaoh, those chariots had been sent to gather them up again and bring them back, or destroy them. Moses lifted up his rod, the waters of the Red Sea parted, and the people crossed over on dry land. And then the people on the other side of that sea were able to turn around and look back as the chariots approached. And when they got there, crossing over in the middle of the dry sea, the waters came back, and the chariots and the horsemen were all drowned and lost in the sea. The people of Israel had experienced all of this. What a powerful message they must have received from God. Not only that, they traveled then through the wilderness toward the land of promise. And as they traveled, God provided for them water from the rock. He provided food and drink for them there in the wilderness as they wandered. And now they had come to Mount Sinai. They were at a critical point in their life as a nation, as the people of God. It was at this point that they were able to say to themselves, well, what does the future have in store for us? Where is God leading us? What is going to happen to us? What does God want us to be and to do as his people as we look to the future? And so Moses, hearing the command of God, we read, went up on the mountain. And he was told to wait. And while he was there, as he was waiting, the people of God remained down below. Well, you know the story a little bit. He was there 40 days, 6 weeks. It's a long time for the people to be without their leader. 6 weeks is a long time for those people not to have the structure and the security and order that one might expect from someone who would provide leadership in that kind of very perilous, dangerous environment. But Moses was up on the mountain, separated from the people. And the people didn't know what was going on with him. He was up there. All they could see was the clouds in the daytime, and then at night they could see fire and smoke from the top of the mountain. And some of them started to get so anxious. Some of them began to be very fearful. Some of them started saying to one another, well, we used to do things differently. Life used to be different for us before Moses came along. We had it all figured out back then. Things were just right. We were slaves, that's true. We were beaten, that's true. It's amazing how much people can forget, if they're willing to, about the bad times. But what's happened to our leader? Is he going to come down from the mountain? Is he being devoured by the fire? Has he been killed already by wild animals? What's going to happen? What's going to happen to us as we look to the future? Especially There they were on top of the mountain. Or there he was on top of the mountain. There they were down below. And while he was there in the presence of God, receiving instruction from God, being prepared by God to lead the people of Israel to the land of promise, while he was getting his marching orders, while God was kind of, you might say, reordering his GPS, if you want to use a modern term, the people were getting anxious and fearful. And so they began to harangue Aaron, the brother of Moses, and they began to say to Aaron, Aaron, you've got to help us out here. You've got to do something for us. We can't handle this anymore. This is getting to be too much for us. And so Aaron said, all right, collect up all your gold jewelry. Bring it all to me. And then they melted it down, and then he formed it into the shape of a calf. A calf, just like the little statuettes that they had in Egypt that were there on the altars of the people of Egypt. You want to have a God that you can see and touch and feel? Here, I'll make one for you. Archaeologists in the Middle East have recently, well, not that recently now, 20 years ago, discovered a figurine that was very much like the kind of statue that Aaron probably formed for them out of gold. Only a few inches high, incidentally. Think of how much that gold would be worth today on the open market. But when it was placed upon the altar, then the people could see their God. Now they had the kind of God they could put their hands on. Now they had the kind of God who would do what they wanted. Now they didn't have to be afraid anymore, because they could tell God how to be God. They could set their course. They could determine their mission. They could figure out what was best for them. They could decide anything they wanted. And if their fears were too great, they would go back to Egypt and accept that suffering all over again. Well, time came for Moses to come down from the mountain. And I wish I could say that he came down from the mountain and it was happily ever after that they lived together. But he was enraged when he saw what they were doing. They were drinking and dancing and singing and doing their own thing, having their own good time. They were back to what they wanted to be in the past. They had forsaken completely the God of the future. And there, in the midst of that environment, Moses was in a real quandary. God wanted to destroy the people altogether. God wanted to simply say, let's close up this shop, we'll start over again. And Moses pleaded on their behalf. As angry as he was with the people for forsaking God, he still had compassion for them. And he pleaded to God. And so God relented of his evil intentions against the people. And he spared them, most of them at least. Yet, none of them would eventually enter into the land of promise. It would be up to another generation called up and raised up by God to cross over into the land that God had promised to Israel. Because of their unfaithfulness, because of their unwillingness, because of their idolatry, they would never have that privilege. And neither would Moses, incidentally. Jesus, on top of the mountain, was at a similar point in his ministry. All of the things that had gone on before were glorious and wonderful. Many people's lives had been changed. And it must have been a tremendous temptation for Jesus there on the mountain to say, it's going okay. I can keep doing this. I'm kind of getting used to this. This is even fun. If healing lepers could be considered fun. But he knew what God's intention was. He knew he had to go forward. He knew that he couldn't stop. And so he went forward. Like Moses, he came down from the mountain and he continued the journey until finally he came to another hill outside of Jerusalem where he suffered and died for the sins of the world. Those questions, of course, that the people of Israel were asking as they came to Mount Sinai are are not that different from the kind of questions we are asking right now in the life of our congregation. What does the future have in store for us? Where is God leading us? What does God want us to be and to do as his people in the years that we have yet to serve him? Those are important questions. And they're questions that we and every generation of Christians have had to ask. They're hard questions. There are no easy answers to any of those questions. Sometimes it requires great sacrifice in order to be consistent in following out on our decisions in response to those questions. Certainly amongst the people of God, as they dealt with those questions, they probably had a lot of conflict. Chances are there were many people who had different ideas about what should happen. And there were many different views. And there might have been some people who even withdrew completely and separated themselves because they couldn't take it anymore. Our anxiety can get such a hold of us, and our fear can so dominate us that it closes off all the possibilities of the future, so much that we don't even see God anymore. And Moses made the decision to be faithful to God. And he led his people to the land of promise. He did not cross over. He did not get to enjoy what was on the other side. But he led them there because he knew that's what God wanted. Could it be that that's what God is saying to us today? We are at a critical point in our life together as a people of God. We have anxieties and fears about the future. Indeed, in this society in which we're living, there are tremendous anxieties and fears all around, every day, one worse than the day before. But on the other hand, we are God's people. We're on God's mission. We are God's church and God's Holy Spirit.